The world seems so out of control. Tsunamis, earthquakes, evil, sin, like we see it on the news every night. And yet, in our Psalms today, we're reminded that God is still king over this earth. Join us today to see why that really matters. All right, good morning. Welcome to our Psalm series. Today we are going to be working through Psalm 47, and we're going to talk about how God reigns over this whole earth. But what that should do for us is it should produce worship. So let's talk about that first, because sometimes I worry about worship and what that looks like in our churches today. We have great singers and great bands and smoke machines and a lot of hype. But do we actually understand worship? J.I. Packer explains this way. He says, worship is telling God his worth in speech and singing. In celebrating his worth, we can say, God, you are awesome and amazing, and I don't deserve you at all. That is a worshipful heart. J.R. Packer says this. He says, that kind of speech and song has largely been replaced, at least in the West, by a form of entertainment calculated to give worshipers the equivalent of a sauna or jacuzzi experience and send them away feeling relaxed and tuned up at the same time. So often we have worship leaders and they have amazing voices and they have amazing bands and amazing guitarists and I get all that because we go to a church where they have amazing worship music. But sometimes I think that we can be so focused on that we forget that worship really means this. It's a time of celebrating God's worth. That's what worship is. And we have to ask ourselves when we walk away from church services, is our worship God-centered or me-centered? Do I just like the music and I just like the song and I don't know that song, so I'm just not going to really sing it? Is it about us? Or do we understand that worshiping it doesn't matter what the song is. We can listen to the words and sing the words and go upward with that. Because we need to realize this. We live in a culture today that says, God is here to make me happy. That's actually not true. We exist for God rather than God existing for us. We exist to serve God. He doesn't exist to serve us. So the question is, do we go to church and sing and honor God because of that? Because we exist for Him? Do we go to church and we praise and worship Him for sending Jesus to die on a cross for us so we could spend eternity with Him? Or do we go to church for something else so that we can get something for me? I need God to fill me today. I need God to answer my prayer. I need it to be about me. See, there's a big difference. And I think this psalm is going to remind us of that. J.I. Packer says this, we need to discover all over again that worship is natural to the Christian heart, as it was to the godly Israelites who wrote the Psalms, and that the habit of celebrating the greatness and graciousness of God yields an endless flow of thankfulness, joy, and zeal. Today's psalm is about worship because God reigns over this earth. Let's begin in Psalm 47 for the director of music of the sons of Korah, a psalm. Remember, these psalms were poems. They were written and put to music, sung in the temple or the tabernacle. Verse 1 says this, clap your hands, all you nations. Shout to the God with the cries of joy. I remember that verse. Shout to the Lord. I can't sing it. Because I'm not that good about that. But there's a song. Most of you would know that. Like, clap your hands, all you people. Shout to the joy of the whatever, okay? But here's the bottom line to that is, why should we be clapping our hands and shouting with cries of joy? And it's really because of this. Verse 2, how awesome is the Lord Most High, the great King over all the earth. We live in a world where people are just terrified. What's going to happen with China or Russia, or what's going to happen with Iran or Iraq? What about the missiles or bombs, or heaven forbid, a nuclear bomb? What about? And then you can just fill in. What about this? What about that? What about, I'm just afraid all the time. But this verse reminds us that it doesn't matter what's going on in the world. It doesn't actually even matter who our president is. It doesn't matter who the leaders of the foreign countries are, because God is king over this earth. And when we can really grasp that, it will change how we look at life on planet Earth. Because we know that he knows what he's doing as ruler of everything. J.I. Packer says that Psalm 47 provides wonderful expressions of God's sovereign reign over this earth. And it's a great reminder of that worship should flow from that truth. Worship flows from recognizing that God rules and reigns over this earth. I just think it changes us when we can say, you know what, I don't know who's going to become president next. I'm going to pray, but God is doing something I don't know. I don't know who's going to become leader of that country or that country. I don't know, but I don't have to, because I trust with all my heart that God rules and reigns over everything that goes on in this earth. Verse 3 says this: He subdued nations under us, peoples under our feet. I love this. This is an awesome picture depicting what this means. Look at this picture here. I'm going to put this up on the screen. This was a statue of Pharaoh at the temple in Abu Simbel, 13th century BC. And if you look at this picture, you'll see that under the king's feet are all these, people. Okay, the people are underneath the kings. And it was this picture of power and authority. And that's what this psalm is like. It's saying, look, everything is under the feet of God himself. The people are under that. God can do anything he wants. And for this psalm, he's saying God subdued the nations under us. And what that meant is anybody that would come up against Israel, that God would subdue those nations. They would not let those nations win unless there was a reason for it. And the reason why is because God is that powerful. Look at verse 4. He chose our inheritance for us, the pride of Jacob, whom he loved. This is about the land. This is about the land that God gave the Jews, the Israelites, Jews as we know them today, stemmed all the way back to Jacob in the book of Genesis. Look at, here's a picture right here, a map of the 12 tribes of Israel. So Jacob, of course, has 12 sons, and to some extent, each one of these sons would get a piece of this particular land of Israel, because this is God's land. And so when he says in verse 4, he chose our inheritance for us, the pride of Jacob, whom he loved. It all fits together with the land of Israel. Verse 5, God had ascended amidst shouts of joy, the Lord amid the sounding of trumpets. We see this in 2 Samuel 6:15 when David brings the ark into Jerusalem. The people were shouting and they were blowing trumpets. Look at 2 Samuel 6:15. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of trumpets. Like they love God. They want his presence in their life. Then the psalm goes on to say this in verse 6, sing praises to God. Sing praises to our King, sing praises. See, this should be the natural response of us as followers of Jesus. Praise, thankfulness, overwhelming gratitude. Once again, why? Look at verse 7. For God is the King of all the earth. Sing to him a psalm of praise. God reigns over the nation. God is seated on his holy throne. The nobles of the nations assemble as the people of the God of Abraham. For the kings of the earth belong to God. He is greatly exalted. The kings of the earth belong to God. The president of the United States belongs to God. And see, it's so fascinating when we can really understand that. And then we can stop getting so freaked out every time we have an election here in the United States. But it's interesting here that in verse 9, he talks about Abraham's name, because the Apostle Paul brings up Abraham a lot. But I love what Galatians 3:29 says. If you are Christ's, if you're a follower of Jesus, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. He's saying it's all about God. It's all about getting to God through Jesus. It's all about his rule over this earth. And it's all about through Abraham's descendants would come Jesus. And thousands of years later, we see people coming to Jesus because of what he did on the cross. That goes all the way back to what we learned in Genesis. And honestly, like I said, our perspective changes when we really grasp the fact that God is king over this earth. Because suddenly we know this. Okay, God is king. He created me. I'm here. I believe in Jesus with all my heart. And if that's you, and you believe in Jesus with all your heart, then here's the deal. We're here to serve the king. That's what we do. To get the good news about Jesus out into the world, that's how we serve the king. I told you last week I'd been reading this book about a missionary, Marilyn, in Papua New Guinea. She went to live with this people group that had no written language, that they had no way of knowing about Jesus. So she went there to, of course, translate the Bible into their language. As I got onto Wycliffe's website, because they translate the Bible all over the world, it was showing all the missionaries that literally are overseas, all over the world, translating the Bible into the language so people can know Jesus. And it was so cute. I looked up to one of the missionaries, and right there, a mom and a dad with 6 kids. They took all 6 of their kids to a foreign country working in the rainforest, jungles, all right? Why? And I think it's because of this. They have a heart to let people know that God is in heaven and he rules. And because he rules, he said Jesus is the only way to God. And they know that people will die when they die, eternally separated from God, because they don't know that information. And so they're over translating the Bible so that people can understand that God rules. Jesus is coming back to this earth to rule and reign. And we have that job to get that message out, maybe not across the ocean in another country, but to our neighbors and to our friends. My prayer is for this lesson that we see God is king over all of this earth. And I'm hoping that that will motivate us to stop being afraid of what's going on in this world and start spending the time sharing the good news about Jesus to tell people that incredible news. And that is why we worship God. Have a good day today.